Hi, I'd like to give a brief introduction to my article. Um, Recently, I've been working on trying to develop a psychological scientific theory that's also emancipatory, that will contribute to um, understanding and solving the massive global crises which are um, threatening our civilization at this point. And it seems to me that psychologists in their personal lives are interested in broad social questions, but within the field of their psychological work, I think a lot remains undiscussed. And I mean, the whole point of the critical psychology is that psychology, mainstream psychology, really doesn't have the tools or the interests or the politics to understand and solve broader social questions. So my ambitious project is to try to extend and expand the field of psychology so that it does have the tools and the concepts and the politics for contributing to solving these enormous and awful problems that are confronting us. So I'm trying to develop a psychological science that's also emancipatory. And my general political model is the work of Marx, because, as everybody knows, Marx devoted his scientific understanding of the capitalist political economy in order to understand its problems and contradictions, and also its potential conditions for preparing the way for a negation of capitalism. So his work was definitely emancipatory and scientific, and each one of those contributed to the other. And so I'm trying to develop psychology in this same broad, multifaceted approach. And um, uh, uh, I've been using the work of Vygotsky as a model for this. And um, most interpreters of Vygotsky don't seem to pick up on the fact that his work was very much like Marx's in being politically emancipatory and also scientific. And so in my article and in my recent work, I've been trying to explain this. Um, I've been trying to explain that Vygotsky did have a political purpose and a political motive for his scientific research, and that actually the the political purpose and objectives contributed a lot to his scientific work. And so that's really what what my article is about. It's trying to show that Marx's political orientation actually contributed and formed his psychological orientation towards viewing psychology as a cultural phenomenon. And what I explain is that Vygotsky made very clear and extensive comments about the fact that psychological processes are formed within the framework of Marx's historical materialist principles uh, and laws, actually. And Vygotsky says this very, very clearly in many, many places, which have not been picked up on, but he does make this point. And what he means is that psychology is cultural in the sense not of a vague and general culture, but in the sense of a Marxist historical materialist culture. And that's really what he means by culture. And again, he says this over and over and over again, and Luria reinforces this many times. And so my article identifies some of these statements and explains them. And the point of Vygotsky's historical materialist approach towards psychological science is that the science will then contribute to the historical materialist transformation of society, which of course is what Marx was talking about. And so I use the Marxist concept of historical materialism to explain Vygotsky's politics and also his science, and especially his notion of culture and cultural historical psychology. And so this is a very novel interpretation of Vygotsky, because, as I said, it's extremely rare to see anybody even talking about the political orientation that Vygotsky had for the social transformation of capitalism and the development of socialism. And so that's the basic point that I tried to make, that Vygotsky's cultural, historical, scientific concepts about human psychology are grounded in the Marxist view of historical materialist culture and historical materialist cultural transformation, which is the radical revolutionary transformation of society. And then I go back and I explain more about Vygotsky's psychological science. And his point is to show how human psychology is connected to historical materialist culture. And I argue that you can actually see this orientation throughout Vygotsky's work. He doesn't say it all the time, but he says it often enough and periodically to prove that that's really what he's talking about. Because if he can ground psychology in culture, then culture is historical materialist, so that makes psychology part of the historical materialist process, including its formation and its transformation. And I give, one important concept of Vygotsky that I explain is his concept of psychological tools. And psychological tools, in his words, are macro-cultural factors which actually form and inform human psychology. And he gives many examples of this, and I give additional examples of this. And psychological tools is really his link of psychology to culture. Because what he's saying is that these cultural factors are the mechanisms that operate our psychology. And that's why he calls them psychological tools. And these macro psychological tools actually do psychological work. They're the factors which become internalized and which structure and direct our psychology and our behavior. So that's basically what I tried to show. I tried to show that Vygotsky is very clear about making this connection of psychology and culture and social transformation. And Vygotsky is very clear that he's basing his work on Marx's work. And then I conclude by explaining that this historical materialist view of psychology has important political implications. Because it says that for psychology to become emancipated and to become changed, it's necessary for its formative cultural factors to become emancipated. So Vygotsky is saying that psychological emancipation requires social emancipation. And I explain his historical materialist model of culture, and then I show how this model can help us to understand contemporary societies and can help us to understand where we need to direct our attention to change these societies in order to achieve emancipation. So that's the overall conception of my paper and of my recent books. My recent books, which you can see on my website, I use this analysis to analyze and critique contemporary social movements, such as Black Lives Matter and various populist movements. And it's a very interesting application of Vygotsky's work to these broader social issues. So I think that's enough of an introduction. And you can always Google me and find my webpage, and my articles are all available there. And the introduction to my books is also there. So I hope you enjoy the article. And also, if you would like to communicate about them, feel free to email me, and I'll be glad to correspond with you. Thank you and goodbye.